Frankie, we did it. We finally made it. After all of this time, we've talked about it. We've been putting together a list of movies for the last year, and we finally made it to something rotten. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Happy Wednesday to you. I hope you're surviving the quarantine. I am your host, PJ Campbell, and I am here with Frank Janisch. Frank, how are you?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm just happy to have you here.
Yeah, finally. This was years in the making. So when you lived in Burbank, we were doing this. We did that first little pilot episode of The Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
And that was fun. Because that day, I remember that day, we had a few drinks. We were watching the movie.
What?
And
Never.
a few drinks. We watched the movie, and then we said, "Hey, let's do this Something Rotten episode," and that was a lot of fun. And then you threw on the PJ Campbell show like weeks or months later, I think it was. But now we're finally doing it proper. This is great.
Yeah, I mean, it only took the fucking world coming to a stop for us to finally get here. But I'm actually glad, because I think that you and I have both gone through a lot over the last year, and I think that had we been doing it in the beginning when we had started talking about it, there's a good chance it might have faltered out, and maybe we wouldn't have been able to do stuff. But here we are, and I think that we've got such a great list of movies, but I think that this one specifically kind of felt like the very necessary one for us to do, especially with the sudden passing of Brian Dennehy that we had last week, with this film celebrating its 25th anniversary. And for those who don't know, this film is Tommy Boy. It's a movie that I love very, very dearly. It's a movie that means so much to me, and I'm very excited to talk about it with you. But real quick, before we jump into it, just a couple of housekeeping type announcements as we, push forward through the week. If you guys have not already, we had 2 streams over the weekend. The first being the PJ Campbell show with Video Drew, Rachel Silvestrini, Maxwell Haddad, myself, Evan Degraff, and Chris Clark. And we tried to figure out the 15 best Broadway musicals of all time. It was quite the show. I hope you guys go back and watch that. And in the same vein, yesterday we did the 420 PJ Campbell special episode with Mark and Draco, RB3, Rachel, Maxwell, and myself, where Evan hosted it because the rest of us were all very high. And we were having a very nice time, and we just wanted to be together on a very special 420 in the 420 month, the only 420 month we're ever going to have. So you got to celebrate it in style, in that way. Of course, tomorrow, suddenly soundtracks, or I guess tonight, technically, when you guys are hearing this, we're recording this the day before. So tonight, Rocky Horror Picture Show. It is happening. You've got Video Drew, Bibiani, myself, Evan, a couple others with Chris Clark watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And then tomorrow night, he'll be talking the show with Whitney Seibold and William Bibiani, who you can see in that lovely little graphic there. But Frank, do you know what we have going on Friday?
I do believe I do. And I'm excited about it.
What would that be?
That would be none other than, yes, Young Guns 2 with Mark Ellis, one of the greatest Westerns of all time. It's going to be... I cannot wait for this, because Young Guns is such... I think it's underappreciated, and we're about to show people just why it should not be underappreciated. It's some of the stuff in these 2 films, but in Young Guns 2 is it's good stuff. If you love Billy the Kid, this is...
If you love history, if you love Westerns, if you love Emilio Estevez, and most specifically, if you love Mark Ellis, you cannot miss this stream. This has been like a year and a half in the making. Even before we were talking about doing Something Rotten, this was like the longest ongoing joke of the PJ Campbell show, is the fact that we had Hogue, who had never seen it. We finally rectified that on Friday.
Now his day has come.
His day has finally come. It's very important. But also, Saturday night, Family Game Night returns with the sequel to Cards Against Humanity with Tom Dagnino, which I can't fathom, and Tim Franco. So things about to get fucking crazy around here. Frank, you've took about a week off, you're just decompressing and playing Final Fantasy VII, and now you see all this stuff happening on the channel. How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's a lot of exciting stuff there. Tom Dagnino, I don't even. Are we sure he's going to show up? I guess we'll find out on the day.
Yeah.
Young Guns 2, I'm very excited about, and Chris Clark, I know suddenly soundtracks is a huge passion thing for him, so I'm glad that he's back doing that. And yeah, just a lot of good stuff going on here now.
There is, man, there is. But more importantly, to that point, it's time to talk one of my all-time favorite films, my favorite comedy of all time, 1995's Tommy Boy. And one of the things that we talked about going into this show with Rotten Tomatoes was we like Rotten Tomatoes, we do. But we also think that Rotten Tomatoes has become weaponized in all the wrong ways, and people don't necessarily understand how to use it, which was part of the reason we came up with the show. And I think that still stands to this day. I think that even when we started talking about it, I think it's only gotten worse over time because people online see it as like a guiding light instead of just a tool.
Right, I think people put too much importance on Rotten Tomatoes and other sites that give you scores for movies. But namely because Rotten Tomatoes is such a big name, people, obviously, even movies in advertising, slap on the certified fresh, label on it and things like that. So while there has been, I think, efforts to tell you this is it's like an aggregate. It's not like an actual score of the movie. But the way they market it, makes it seem like this is the actual score of the movie, and it is used to sway people. But the scores, as we were going through lists of movies, we just could not believe some of these were ranked rotten on the site. And while reviews and other reviewers and critics can certainly have their opinions, I think when someone sees something that's rotten, they won't necessarily give it the time of day. And what we're going to do here is look at some of these movies that we can't believe are rotten and hopefully bring to light why we think you should at least give it a shot if when you look at the score and it's rotten, maybe give it a second look, think it over before you completely pass by it.
Totally. And that was part of the reason that we had wanted to do this. And it's so crazy. Like, you should see the list that we have of movies, you guys. Like, there's some stuff on here that's ridiculous that you would never think of. And I think that's one thing I want to also point out is that if we're looking some of these older movies like we are with Tommy Boy, there's less reviews, obviously, on a movie like this than there would be on, say, something like Batman v Superman now. But we're also still getting a pretty good snapshot, if you will, from that time. And at the moment right now, as I look at Tommy Boy, with 43 reviews counted in the official critic database side of it, it is a 42%. And that is so interesting to me because this movie has ended up becoming such a giant hit in pop culture and what it means to people, especially people our age. This movie has continued to stand the test of time. Sorry, you guys. And you would never know that this was a rotten film.
There's so many things in watching this movie again, because I hadn't seen it in quite a while. I just remember growing up, and I'm just kind of going to get right into it with some of the catchphrases that Tommy Boy has in this movie. The holy shnikes and things like. I would say them. My mom was like, "Don't say that." Like, don't, as if I was swearing, or he would say "damn," and it's just like I would say "damn," just like he would. But the other thing is that like there's all these kind of things that kind of remind me of my childhood growing up watching this, and it's sad to think that if someone's perusing Rotten Tomatoes and they see a rotten next to this movie, that they won't watch it and they won't get to enjoy some of the things that I've gotten to enjoy or you've gotten to enjoy about the movie simply based on a rating. So I'm glad, in the end we're doing this. But I also suspect most people who love this movie are probably listening to this anyway. But if there are the few out there that are just kind of, let's see what they have to say about it, because it is kind of, I guess, spoilery talk. But if you see the episode title and you want to follow along, you've never seen the movie, I highly suggest go see the movie and then listen to this.
Yeah, definitely. If you've never seen it, I would definitely recommend watching it, of course, before you listen to us really talk about it, because there's going to be a lot of stuff we're going to talk about the film itself in a very spoilerly fashion, as Frank said. I mean, of course, the movie is also 25 years old, so we're really past the spoiler ban, but just in case, and you've never seen it, I do highly recommend it, and it's very easy to get. Like, it's a very accessible film. So with that, starting with you as a child, you were just kind of talking about it. Did you discover it at a young age? Where were you with Tommy Boy?
Yeah, so it came out in '95. I think I might have seen it a year, maybe 2 years after it had came out. Let's see, I was about 9, 8, 10 when I saw it, 10 or 11 when I saw it. And there are certainly things in that movie that really kind of, if you've never seen the movie, you've probably heard someone say "Holy shnikes," or you've seen some sort of merchandising. You know, if you're a Chris Farley fan, you've seen "Holy shnikes" or whatever. I always think about the kind of like the Vader moment when he's talking to the fan. It's always very iconic to me when he's doing that, or the scene with the deer in the car. There's just like little things that you've probably seen in some sort of like comedic montage, or things that are just so memorable about this movie that it stands the test of time. Not only because it's Chris Farley, but it's just like some of his best work some of the best and few work that he's done, at least movies wise, with David Spade. And that's another big component of Tommy Boy, not just Chris Farley. There's that dynamic that was being built and born there. And so all of that kind of was coming back to me as I'm watching it. Like, man, I remember all of this, where I was, who I watched it with, like my friend growing up. But we'd watch in his basement, and another just kind of offshoot topic, similar though, it's Chris Farley and David Spade again, but in Black Sheep. I know, but just this one story is in the movie they're in the cabin, and the roof gets blown off and everything, and then eventually the bunk comes down, crashing down on David Spade, and to me and my friend that was like the funniest thing of all. I mean, we rewound that spot about 10 or 15 times just watching it on loop.
Yeah.
And I say that all to say that the David Spade Chris Farley dynamic that was there is here in Tommy Boy, and all of the little back and forths are just some of the things that really just are fun to watch between, when you see Tommy Boy or Tommy, trying to not come off as stupid and he's trying to make his comebacks, things like that. It's really endearing and sweet, but also at the same time you realize this guy is kind of a dummy.
Right, totally. And that's one of the things that I always loved about the movies. I think it never really shied away from how dummy-ish he actually is, but he's so sweet and so endearing, like you don't really mind. For me, similarly, I think I discovered it around like 98, 99. I was at a friend's house and we were doing a camp out in his backyard, but we pulled the television outside with us. And it was one of the TVs that had a VHS player inside, and they had the VHS of Tommy Boy. And that was the first time I ever saw it, was inside of a tent in the backyard of one of my friend's houses. And I fell in love with it instantly. And it was funny because like right around that time is when I fully discovered SNL. And one of the very first things I got was the best of Chris Farley.
Absolutely. I mean, the best of Chris Farley is so good. And then when you have like other SNL alums in the movie as well, it just really, especially if you loved SNL and seeing those guys with David Spade and Dan Aykroyd, and even if you were watching other SNL property that's were movies, you have Rob Lowe's obviously in Wayne's World, which is another SNL property. So all of that stuff, just kind of, especially during that time, you felt like it was an extension of SNL in a way.
Totally.
At some points,
Because Lorne produced this. And
Right.
I still, to this day, at least in my opinion, I think this might be the best movie that Lorne produced outside of the SNL banner, because it wasn't a strict SNL film. It was its own thing.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think was Black Sheep also right? So I think Chris Farley's movies really weren't tied into anything SNL related per se.
No.
Is that right?
No, they weren't. I mean,
Right?
you could have easily tried to do any of his characters from SNL.
Yeah.
But I think it was always best that they were trying to do other things.
Yeah, because they had Night at the Roxbury, obviously Wayne's World, Where's some of the
Coneheads.
Coneheads, right?
Pat the movie, which was a horrible bomb and was pulled after like a week in theaters, I think.
Right. What's
Superstar with Molly Shannon.
Superstar.
Blues Brothers, obviously, maybe the most iconic.
But even then, Blues Brothers, I think even didn't really truly seem like SNL. I mean, it was the characters, but it was so outlandish. Anything more than they could ever do on that stage. What was the other movie? Bruce.
The Ladies Man.
Ladies Man, yeah.
Yes.
The Ladies Man was another one. Like those title characters. You never saw Chris Farley play like one of his characters. Leading one of his movies. Tommy Boy wasn't from SNL. Black Sheep wasn't from SNL. Or was it Beverly Hills Ninja wasn't from SNL?
I mean, the obvious choice would have been like the Matt Foley character if you were going to do something. And I'm actually surprised of all the characters who never made a transition. Matt Foley in the mid-'90s feels like it would have been the very obvious choice.
That one could have been very, very interesting, but I don't know how tired that gimmick gets in terms of because he's at like 10,000% in that character, which is to say that Chris Farley always gave 110% in anything he did, and you can see it in something as slapsticky as Tommy Boy. You can really see him delivering everything he has into these lines, these little silly scenes, these little silly, just really random things that happen for no reason. It's just like they're almost kind of, in a way, a little bit like SNL skits in a sense with this character, but they've made a complete narrative around it.
Well, and that's kind of what I wanted to touch on real quick. We also got a bunch of quotes and, little thoughts from a couple of the people we know in the space who love this movie as much as we do. And to your point, this actually comes from the chairman of the Movie Trivia Schmodown, Christian Harloff, who said the first time we ever witnessed the brilliance of Chris Farley as a leading comedy man was with this film. And I think he's 100% correct in that.
Yeah, definitely. I think what also caught me, or I've noticed more this time now that I'm older, is there's very few moments in this movie where he's got to be serious or play a certain somber tone, either with his father passing in the movie, which we'll get to that, also giving, these speeches in terms of he's going to help try and save the company. There's some, or like at the very end of the movie when he's trying to talk to his dad, for the win. Like there's some moments in there we can really see Chris Farley, which you would call act, in a dramatic sense, and really, and I think if we've learned anything about comedic actors is that they have tremendous ability to act in a dramatized sense, and Chris Farley, I think, while we never really ever got to see that on film, there's little moments in here where I wish, like, man, what if he really went into a very dramatic movie, had he stayed with us? It could have been very kind of like the way Jim Carrey went, Robin Williams, like that ilk. I mean, he's like just as talented, if not more. Same thing with Adam Sandler, So
and Sandler, to his point and his credit, has kept Chris's memory alive all these years later, because one of the things that I was going to touch on later, but I can kind of talk about it, is Callahan Auto is obviously the backdrop for this story. And Callahan Auto actually pops up a few times in later Sandler films, including 50 First Dates. So the idea is that Tommy is still out there doing his good work, and Chris's spirit essentially lives on. And then Sandler, I mean, look at that song he did just a few years ago. That Chris Farley song is heartbreaking and beautiful, and it's really kept his spirit alive.
Absolutely. And when you see stuff like that, especially, I mean, obviously Adam Sandler, it might be the most vocal advocate, I guess, in a sense, of who Chris Farley was and what he meant, and just the genius that was behind Chris Farley. I even think Adam Sandler on Conan O'Brien's podcast, and they talked about Chris Farley. I forget, right? And there's just a bunch of stories, and watching this movie with Chris Farley in it, and it's just like, even when he's with Rob Lowe after the cow tipping thing, he's covered in mud, and like that scene where he's I'm a man, and he's singing, like the whole scene, he has the entire scene. He has all the energy in the world delivering to that scene, and it's something that only lasts for like 15 seconds and then we're moving on. And there's a bunch of spots like that throughout the movie where he's obviously the focal point. You look at when he was trying to sell car parts to the one guy, but he had the model cars on his desk. I mean, all of that. But also, you look at that stuff and you go, and that's why I say like this kind of like some of the, like SNL skit ideas that maybe weren't fully fleshed out, but they have these little parts that they've figured out. I don't know how they wrote this movie or what was the idea behind it, but I mean, do you know?
I was going to bring that up, actually, is that with the 25th anniversary, one of the things that's been going on is Peter Siegel, who directed this. He's very well known for doing the Get Smart reboot. He was the one who actually did Naked Gun 33 and 1/3, the last Naked Gun film with Leslie Nielsen. Siegel's had a very prominent run through comedy and a lot of that same type of comedy genre. But he talked about a lot that they were like put into a very hard place where they didn't even have a script when they went into shooting. And he talked about they were shooting on the fly because they were going to run into SNL season and they were supposed to be shooting in the off season. And he started to grow a beard because he thought the movie was going to be a huge failure. And he didn't want to be the one who tore down. No, Seagal.
Oh, Seagal.
Yeah, he got this giant beard because he didn't want people to know what he would look like if he was wrong. And he didn't want to be the guy who destroyed Chris Farley and David Spade's career.
Oh, I mean, first of all, I don't think anyone's going to destroy Chris Farley's career. I mean, unfortunately, besides Chris Farley or David Spade for that matter, because at that point, I mean, those two guys were just at the top of the comedy duo, and the genius that came from Chris Farley. There was just no way. I mean, could it have been a bad movie? Sure, but I think Chris Farley would have been okay. I mean, he probably would have stayed with SNL, and maybe not. I don't know what could have happened. I'm not really too clear on the timeline right now off the top of my head. So who knows what would happen? I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just so funny, though, to think that the very first movie out the gate for these two would end up being like this kind of behind-the-scenes disaster, if you will. But I think it's also to their credit that even though the movie wasn't written at the time and Siegel was a fairly new filmmaker, they made a film that is still so full of heart, but also so zanily comic. It's the perfect balance of what Abbott and Costello was, but for like a modern sensibility.
Yeah, I like that comparison. I haven't seen a whole lot of Abbott and Costello. I've seen a few things and totally get their dynamic. And I think you're right that Chris Farley and David Spade do embody that kind of dynamic in terms of David Spade. And look, honestly, Tommy Boy and Black Sheep are not that dissimilar.
Right.
And so the formula is very much the same, where David Spade's kind of the straight guy, and Chris Farley, he's going to bring you all the antics and the craziness and, the catchphrases and whatnot. So that movie is definitely this, but I think what they proved beyond Tommy Boy and into Black Sheep was that people still love that stuff, and it's just there for like a good time. Now, does it equate to, an Oscar-worthy movie? No, but at the same time, I don't think they're preoccupied making, an Oscar type of movie. They're there to just laugh and have fun and bring it to others. And I think that's what, when you look at Chris Farley's life, that's what he was about. And we can really go into a lot of Chris Farley stuff, and I don't want to get too heavy with it, but I just watched anything he does now or has done, and it's sad, and it also makes you mad that he's not around anymore.
I think that all the time, man, because if anyone who knows me and how much I love Chris Farley, like my dream project in Hollywood, if I ever got to do anything, is a biopic about Chris Farley. Like, I've read the book about his life so many times that his brother put together. I've seen the documentaries. Like, I've fully digested in the world of Chris Farley for so long, and I just love him so much that it breaks my heart all the time that it feels like we've moved on from him in a way. Not that we have, obviously, but the world had to move on, and we've kind of lost that brilliant spark that was Chris Farley because he was here and then he was gone.
Yeah, so I don't know how much of an inspiration he can play to the younger generation, because his stuff is older and it's not, times are changing, but I think, it's interesting too, because the the Bulls Michael Jordan documentary 10-part series is airing right now on ESPN, and a lot of the talk has been some of the talk has been that this will actually help to inspire the younger generation of NBA players in a way that it may not have ever been able to, but because now it's been presented on a huge platform like ESPN and around the world, that younger players are seeing this stuff for the first time in a different way, or, so I feel like Chris Farley, amongst many other comedic geniuses that have come and gone, could be, an impetus for inspiration for a younger crowd. And it's unfortunate that if some of his movies aren't making, top 50 lists or whatever, that the younger generation is going to kind of overlook them, and that'd be unfortunate because it would then take a real cinephile to kind of, I guess, at this point, to dig into those lists and pick out, they would have to do some real serious homework, I feel like, or it seems like, and which is kind of unfortunate because Chris Farley, you just watch any of his stuff and you just go, I don't know how he was able to do some of the things that he did, not only just like his brain, but like physically, because he's a pretty large man, and yet he never, at least on stage or in movies, he never acted like, he never let that impede him in any way. He either used it to his benefit, or he just moved as fast and as swiftly as you would never believe. So I mean, that's also part of his genius and his talent.
Well, and the crazy part about that is in his personal life, that was actually something that played a huge part in who he became, because that stuff haunted him. Yeah. He didn't want to be known as just the big, loud, fat guy. And I think that he actually worked really hard to be the big, loud, fat guy, but a different version of it, if you will. And I think without him, and this is no offense to who I'm about to talk about, but if you look at Kevin James has very much filled the role of what Chris Farley was, especially in the Sandler world.
Sure.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think Chris actually opened a door in that way for Kevin James to succeed, because Kevin's characters in a lot of the same ways, because I think a lot of them are kind of homages to Chris in a way, in the way that they're written. They're not written to be like big, loud, fat, schlubby type guys. Like, they're big guys that have heart and they want to be loved and they want to bring something to the world. And I think that that's another part of it, Adam trying to let him live on.
That's interesting. I really equated Kevin James with the career of Chris Farley. I mean, that's interesting now that I'm kind of looking at it and then thinking the movies that Kevin James has done. Like, could you imagine Chris Farley and Will Smith and Hitch? Like, man, my mind's like, because like it's funny too, because even in Tommy Boy, he's when he passes by the woman in the bikini at the pool at the hotel, and he's
you know where the gym is.
Yeah, he's being all macho and suave and stuff like that, or even in the beginning of the movie with what's her name? I forget her name. I forget. But his love interest in the movie.
Yeah, she is one. We were talking about this off mic recently. She's one of those actresses that I always like when she's in things, but she didn't do a whole lot. Julie Warner.
Yeah. Even around her, he was confident in a sense, and in those scenes too. Like, we're talking about the weight stuff, when he's on the sailboat, or when he's doing the fat guy in the tiny coat and stuff, and it's like he plays into it, and he doesn't let you use it against him, and he uses it for himself to make you laugh, and that's what he was so great about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about this stuff a lot. I mean, we're talking about the idea of him being in Hitch, but like, look at The Zookeeper, or even what was there was one where Kevin James played like an MMA fighter. He was a teacher who joined MMA.
Oh, no, I didn't know.
And it was a Sandler one, but it was a more serious one too. It actually let Kevin kind of stretch dramatically a little bit. I mean, it's still a comedy, but it had a lot of serious moments. And I kind of think about that now. And Tommy Boy feels like the beginning of that rise in a way, because I don't think that necessarily would have happened without him, even though he's no longer here.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's one of those things I think about a lot. And then I think about, you bring up Black Sheep and the idea that, think of all the movies that David Spade and Chris could have done together had he not passed away. Like, their friendship goes so deep and was so prevalent throughout all of SNL in the 90s, and just like on the big screen, as we saw, there was just such a real friendship there. So it's just crazy.
Yeah, although I'm not sure how many movies they would have done together, because I think after a while, people catch on, it gets kind of stale. But it would have been interesting to see what other projects they would have collaborated on or been a part of, and I would just wonder what their collective minds could have created. Like how much of a muse was Chris Farley for David Spade and vice versa, and whoever else they were running around in their circles. So. Especially when you take Chris Farley out of that, the crowd that he was in, you take that genius out. I mean, it's a huge setback in terms of creativity, right? So it would have been interesting to see if they would have done more, because I don't think David Spade and Chris Farley would have made that many more movies in the style of Tommy Boy and Black Sheep. Mm-hmm. But I certainly think they would have needed to work quite time, because when you look at Tommy Boy and Black Sheep, again, it was like this formula of, if it ain't break, don't fix it. So
right.
Maybe they would have, but you never know.
You never know, and that's always going to be the thing that we're always going to wonder, I think. And I mean, we know that David still cares very deeply about him. Our friend Mark Ellis, he told us that when he went on David Spade's show, one of the things David talked about privately was about Chris and their friendship and stuff. Like, he's very open about that. So that stuff does still matter to him. But one thing that does also matter to this film is Brian Dennehy. Brian Dennehy, who just passed away very suddenly in the last week. He's one of the all-time great character actors. And Chance Ellison actually sent me this quote saying, Brian Dennehy doesn't get enough credit for how good he is in the few scenes he has. And I don't disagree with that. I think Dennehy actually brings a lot of the dramatic weight to the film that Chris actually excels at continuing once it takes off.
Yeah, and I think the key thing that Dennehy does for Chris Farley's character is that first of all, I can't picture anybody more suited to play Chris Farley's father in a movie than Brian Dennehy. I mean, you just look at those two side by side, you're like, that makes a lot of sense to me.
100%.
But I think what it did was it set up the fact that, yeah, this guy's a goofball, Tommy Boy. But when you see his dad embrace him and love him for that stuff, and is like, "You're my son. It's still, here's an office. I got some surprise for you," and you see him like accept him as that and love him as that kind of person. I think what it does is it sets up the rest of the movie for you to get on board with kind of the antics that he has, and the slapsticky kind of comedy that Tommy Boy has throughout the rest of the movie, and accept it as it's not too outlandish, because the straight guy, or his dad, was very welcoming of it and loving of it. So I think it kind of what I'm trying to say, it kind of plays into letting you believe this wacky kind of personality can exist, because it's being accepted by his dad in that way, because David Spade's character is like, you're a complete moron the entire time, and eventually wins him over and all that, or they come to a mutual true friendship at the end of it.
Well, it's one of the things I like about it, and it's very grounded in that Brian Dennehy of it all, as you just said. I think that's a very big, very good point, because without that performance, I think that Chris could almost feel very outlandish, and I think it really comes down to the first moment that they see each other, when he's talking about the fact that he doesn't want to sell the company because he wants it to always be family owned. He doesn't want to take a loan. He doesn't want to have a partner. He wants Chris to run it in the end. He wants Tommy to take over. And so when they see each other that first time, they share that same energy, but you also see the way that he talks to everyone around him, and he's such a brilliant businessman. He's such a people person. And it's like Tommy has parts of that, but he's missing that book smarts.
Right. And I think, right, because Brian Denny's character, the dad, you're right. He demonstrates the book smarts and stuff of that. But in that wedding scene when they're dancing and singing, you're like, okay, these are two guys. This is father and son for sure. Like Brian Denny, he's just not like the genius business guy. He's also funny and kind of quirky in his own right. Chris's character, Tommy Boy, just happens to take it to a different level, but nonetheless, he comes from this guy. He's been working in the family business all his life or part of it, and so you're like, yeah, he could be that guy because you've seen some of the serious moments. I mean, especially the funeral scene, which I think was like actually a really great transition between him laying on the ground, everybody going to look over, and then when you pull back out, they're at the funeral, and it's like, and I will say, the one thing that kind of took me out of that dramatic moment was just seeing Tommy Boy walk down the road by himself. I thought it kind of felt a little too out of place for my liking in terms of holding the dramatic effect. Because then you cut to him just sitting at the plant, looking around at the Callahan sign and stuff like that. And that kind of brought me back to the dramatic thing. But that's just kind of like nitpicking. Wouldn't make me rate this movie rotten by any means, So maybe for some other people, apparently.
Right.
But it just, and again, one of those dramatic scenes for Chris Farley, it just shows you kind of like the depth you can go and the depth that Tommy Boy, that character, had in terms of, yeah, very funny, always joking around, but when things were serious, he could get serious when he needed to be, and then when he did later on in the movie, in terms of like, I got to make all these sales, you could believe it that he had that within him. He wasn't just, like David Spade's character thought, just a complete moron. There was more to it,
Well, and it's funny that you bring up the funeral sequence real quick because our friend Mark Ellis, the aforementioned Mark Ellis, actually had this to say about the film. He says, I just note that it does what best comedies do. It makes you laugh till you cry and makes you emotional till you cry. Yeah. The quick scene of Farley walking alone after his dad's funeral while the bagpipes play Amazing Grace, chills.
Oh, I mean, the bagpipe stuff, I mean, I don't care. A lot of 99% of the time, that's always going to be a gut punch in most scenes. Yeah. And I thought just that moment, aside from, that's just me, the whole walking down the road thing. And then, anyways, so, but the whole, everything they were going for with that and trying to, pull out of you definitely worked. And it was great to see, Chris Farley play that and you believe it and like actually get emotional for it.
Mm-hmm. And I think again, because of how good Brian Dennehy is in those moments, it really sells the sadness of what is to come in those moments because it happens so suddenly in the film. You're not expecting it. I mean, it's a big, joyous day. It's a wedding. I mean, that's right. Kind of, you don't think of weddings as being overly dramatic, but I mean, now I can think of between this and The Godfather, very dramatic things happening at big weddings.
It's very true. I was thinking of The Godfather because, like, here's Brian Dennehy his character talking about brake parts. He's trying to make a sale at his own wedding, and in Godfather, he's dealing with all the other, the stuff that he deals with, not brake pads, but but kind of, I did think of that, like, guy at his own wedding, but because he was like that also demonstrated the respect level that other people had of of the character in that movie. So and I'll say that I meant to say really too. When you look at the relationship between Tommy Boy and his father, you could just tell that, like, they were like, yes, they were father and son, but they were like best friends. They like knew everything about each other. They did everything together. They always talked all the time. I mean, you could literally in your mind, like within a snap second, you could picture this backstory between them. Doing everything together, happy, always having a good time. And so then when his dad does pass, you're just like, oh man, that is a great dude. A great father to Tommy that he's losing. Also, the business aspect of it, but more so, Tommy just lost the most important person of his life in a profound way, and you only got that through maybe 10 or 15 minutes of the relationship.
Well, and really, like, arguably the one person who still believes in him too. That's
right.
The part of that situation. He's not only losing the most important person personally, but maybe the one person who actually believes in him as a human being. Because one of the running jokes through the film is the fact that Tommy went to college for 7 years,
Right.
to be a doctor.
Right.
I mean, the very first joke in the movie essentially becomes the D plus. Oh my God, I passed.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments in the movie, and then just I wish we'd known each other. This is a little awkward.
Like,
Yeah,
there are things like that, and I can probably see why someone would rate it rotten, but I still think it's just like there's little things like that come out of nowhere. These little moments, these little comedic moments that I feel like maybe they just thought up on the spot. Like, would it be funny if I just grabbed this guy and he was like, I don't know you. Like, it's funny, but also kind of comes out of nowhere. There's other scenes like that. I forget. There was one. So when Rob Lowe is in the delivery or the shipment area with the computers where he's manipulating the orders, and the girl walks in and is like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "Oh, I was waiting for you." And he sits down by the tube that sucks up the orders, and the shirt just gets sucked up. It's like, where did that come? Why is that happening? It's funny, but like completely out of nowhere, and you're just like, okay, and like he's like, I gotta go, and that was it. It was like, and so like that was just
see Rob Lowe. Sure.
Well, yeah, that's probably like the studio's like, contractually obligated to show Rob Lowe, half naked. So
I don't know if you noticed this, and it's kind of funny to me, and I never really thought about it until recently because I had never noticed. Rob Lowe is uncredited in the film.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
And I had never realized that before, and I've tried to look it up before we started, and even Peter Segal is like, I'm not really sure how that happened. It might have just been something that Lauren asked him to do post Wayne's World as a favor, but I just never really put that together before.
Is Bo Derek credited then? Because okay, I was gonna say. I mean, like, if we're gonna talk about one attractive-looking human, we should talk about another attractive-looking human. The Bo Derek scene where she comes out of the pool, and Tiny Boy's like, "Is that for me?" And his dad's like, "No, son." Yeah, I mean, it's just like that dynamic too, right there, demonstrating their relationship. And it's a great moment.
Covering your eyes.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm talking about like out of the blue moments that. Well, I guess not kind of out of the blue, but just like. When David Spade, and Chris Farley they had like basically like a sing along towards the end of the movie after they had made the sales and stuff like that. There's like 3 or 4 songs that they're just kind of singing along. It's like, I get it, So I can see why critics like who are looking at it with a fine tooth comb in terms of like critically, I can see why they would dock it a few points because it's at some point you're just kind of like, all right, but there's so many other great moments of this movie that just make you laugh. And really, I thought the ending of the movie where they go to Zelensky, where they go to Chicago, which, by the way, looking at 1994, 95 Chicago, when I'm here in Los Angeles now, looking at that skyline, it looks completely barren to what it is today. I mean, I could still know where they were going, except for 2 buildings that I was like, I don't know if they were ever in Chicago or if they were torn down, which was, I think, the building that they went in for Zelensky. I was like, is that a building here in LA? But I could really tell
later.
Yeah. But like, and it was also funny that when they're in the bank and someone raises their voice, they automatically assume it's a robbery. It's like, that's very Chicago. It's like that's good.
And that's another part of the thing that I love kind of about the overall SNL movie universe is how many of these take place in Chicago, because Wayne's World is just outside of Chicago. The Blues Brothers is going to Chicago. Like, so many of these films take place in the Chicago universe.
Well, that's because a lot of those guys, Dan Aykroyd, well, I don't know if Dan Aykroyd, but, Chris Farley, because I know Dan Aykroyd was up in SC Toronto, I think. Or
Bill Murray, I believe, is one of the ones you're referring to.
Oh, Bill. Okay, I don't. Wasn't? But Dan isn't.
I think Aykroyd is too, but I know for sure.
Okay. Yeah, Murray and all that. Yeah, but like a lot of those guys went to Second City and Improv Olympic in Chicago. All like basically anyone who got famous in the mid '90s on SNL, more than likely, came from Second City, Chicago, or the Improv Olympic. I mean, Chris Farley did. You had, like Tina Fey and Chris Meadows. All those characters come out of Second City. So you're obviously gonna, and they spent a lot of time in Chicago during those years getting to SNL, which is interesting because like Second City and Improv Olympic, I mean they hold auditions for SNL, and SNL goes there to scout for new talent. And if you go to Second City in Chicago, or Improv Olympic, I mean you see all their pictures on the wall. It's really cool. If you haven't had the chance to go, if you ever visit Chicago or you're from Chicago, haven't been to Second City, I highly encourage it. You'll see a lot of great comedic players that have come out of there, and you'll be like, wow, this person right here, this person, Catherine O'Hara. I mean, it's like another one. Like you'll be like, whoa, it's just like some great stuff there. And Chris, I don't know how much they go into in the book, but like obviously, like Improv Olympic was the improv was huge for Chris Farley with Shauna Halpern, I think or Del Close, those minds. So it makes sense why you would kind of insert Chicago one way or the other with these SNL movies.
Yeah, I love to believe that a lot of them take place in the same universe now, especially because some of the characters also, like, if you look, Frank Oz is in Blues Brothers, then he's also in Coming to America, and he's then, like, Trading Places is in that universe. So even the ones that Lauren wasn't doing, there's just, like, this overall connection to this world, and I like to believe that they all just kind of live in it. It's like the cinematic universe before the cinematic universe.
Right.
Which I really love. But I really do like, speaking of Rob Lowe, and this kind of conversation we're having, the idea that he was on Wayne's World and then went into Tommy Boy, and he's playing very similar characters, but he's still so good, and he could have easily like phoned it in, but he doesn't. I actually really love his character.
Yeah, his character. I mean, I'll let you know right off the bat by throwing a beer can into the stroller. It's like, all right, what kind of character is this? And it's interesting because if you don't know like the little twist of the movie, you're just wondering, what does this all mean? Because, oh, by the way, look, after watching this movie, so Bo Derek's character, right, the mom, I forget what her character name is, but at the end at the Zelensky Tower or wherever, the building business,
Beverly,
and Beverly, right, Zelensky goes off with her at the end of the movie after she tried to con him, basically. And it's like, I get it. She's hot. But, like, she also just tried to, like, swindle millions of dollars from you. And it's like, come on, I'm tired. Like, what is that? I never even realized that's what happened. Because I hadn't seen the movie in such a long time. I'm like, that's what happened? Rob Lowe gets arrested. And it's like,
she does not.
But she does not. It's like, because he had the rap sheet, and I don't know. It was just one of those weird. Because I don't know why wouldn't I don't know why you wouldn't have Beverly also arrested. But maybe I don't know. Maybe Bo Derek didn't want to be arrested on scene. I don't know.
I honestly always just chalk it up to a guy being the guy.
100%. But in that time, sure.
Yeah. So that's how I always saw it. It's just very funny that you bring it up in that way, because I was going to bring it up later when we talk about Aykroyd's character. But I do love that. I think it's a really random but also surprisingly accurate portrayal of what might have happened in a situation like that.
Yeah, but it would have happened in a much more sleazy way if this was like a rated R movie. I mean, I can only imagine.
So. Well, you know what? Actually, on that point, and I wanted to bring this up, and I think this is very interesting, and I notice it every time I watch it, especially recently. This movie's really sweet without having like a really filthy side, even for being PG-13. It like very skirts that rating, and it actually surprises me. It never really goes for those very surprisingly, raunchy jokes that you might be expecting from an SNL movie. Like, it really skirts away from those.
I mean, for the most part, you're right, but there's a few moments, but like the one that is, and I talked about earlier, where David Spade's looking out the window watching the woman skinny dip in the pool at a hotel, which is, first of all, that would never happen. like no woman's looking around at a hotel pool in the middle of the night thinking it's okay to skinny dip. That's never going to happen. So that definitely is a dream. And the whole point of that was to set up Chris Farley making fun of David Spade for working it. Like, it's like that was the whole impetus of it, and it's like, all right, okay. It's only to, I guess, kind of deconstruct uh, the perfectness that David Spade character was trying to portray, I guess, throughout the whole movie. I guess that's maybe like the purpose, to bring him, kind of take him down a couple notches. He's not this, just a straight nerdy guy who's a know-it-all, but that he also has some kind of, maybe some weird faults or kinks or whatever you want to call it. And Chris Farley is finally gonna, his character Tommy Boy's gonna get one over on him because he can kind of poke fun at this instead of Tommy Boy being made fun of by David Spade the entire movie. So I don't know. It was just like, when I was watching it, and maybe they also had ideas for like really some funny puns about wanking it and the Yankees and
Right.
all that stuff. So it's great.
Is it alfalfa?
Or
it's Spade?
Right? It's like, okay. And once again, it's a scene in which they're going to sleep that later they would do in Black Sheep. That would be one of my favorite all-time Chris Farley David Spade moments in a movie in Black Sheep, which I said, bunk bed coming down. So good.
Oh man, there's just so much of that in this movie, and a lot of this again does translate later to Black Sheep. I mean, Black Sheep was put into turnaround almost as fast as this movie was successful, and had a lot of the same problems in production. And part of the reason I don't want to hit on all that is because Black Sheep is even more rotten on Rotten Tomatoes than this movie.
Oh.
So I mean, there's always the case to be made that we're going to have to talk about it,
and
you want us to talk about it.
And I, like I said, I personally prefer Black Sheep to Tommy Boy. If you had to make me choose between one, which, how dare you, first of all. Second of all, if you did, I would begrudgingly pick Black Sheep, because I don't ever want to disparage Tommy Boy.
No, I mean, who wants to disparage Tommy Boy? I mean,
Also, no, nothing huge, but I don't know if this was, maybe just because it's Chris Farley movie, but there is a guy, his name is Gilmore, and I was like, oh, Happy? Oh, I don't, it's
right.
kind of, like, it just caught my ear, because you're in the SNL, Chris Farley, Adam Sandler world, all that.
Those things start to...
Yeah, I think... Yeah.
I mean, look, we all also agree that one of the all-time great supporting performances in any movie is the Billy Madison character that Chris Farley plays, right?
Oh, yes.
I mean,
yes.
I'm going to turn this goddamn bus around.
I mean, he played those great kind of one-note characters, and it kind of reminds me... I don't know, it's interesting because... Well, you would think that maybe Chris Farley would have played Lunch Lady in that movie, because it would have fit, but like I don't know, I feel like Lunch Lady and the bus driver and Billy Madison are related. I just feel like they are.
Well, and then of course, I mean, if you remember, he was also in Wayne's World.
Right, as the bouncer, right?
Bouncer. So I mean, he's definitely...
Was he the Shitty Beatles?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
How are they?
I love
Shitty. So it's not just a clever nickname.
I love how he would pop up and stuff, because a lot of those SNL players would pop up in each other's movies. And in this one, It's a little less prominent. Again, obviously, Rob Lowe is in this and Dan Aykroyd is in this. But I wonder if part of it was because David and Chris were at the forefront. And since they were both big on SNL at the time, I wonder if the push was just to try to get them out in front and center instead of having everyone surrounding them.
Yeah, I wonder I wonder if that was kind of like the thinking. It's like, we got our two main guys. They're leading the movie. We're not going to make this an SNL, because they could have had someone play the love interest from someone from SNL.
Mm-hmm.
They had someone like that. To tie more into it. Obviously, if you're going to get Bo Derek. I mean, you get Bo Derek. So.
Right. Well, I mean, even looking at, there's clearly characters that could have been the Tim Meadows of the movie very easily if you wanted to.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
I mean,
you could have made many of the factory workers different SNL players. could have
Right.
taken up those spots, you know.
So it's actually one of those things that I always think about while I watch it, because I'm like, I'm actually glad they didn't do that, because in a way it
Yeah.
kind of skirts it away from being an SNL film. Lorne produced it.
Right.
Very much its own thing versus being an SNL movie like Wayne's World.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point, because they easily could have done that. But, you know, I think by them not doing that, you're right. It's really, they don't. I think by not doing that, they're trying to get away from the fact that maybe it's an SNL produced type of movie, to where you don't take it seriously enough. Maybe if that was their thinking, I'm not sure. Because there wasn't a whole lot of that with. I mean, there was a little bit, like we just said, with Wayne's World, but not a whole lot, right?
Not a ton. I mean, like, not that I can think of.
Yeah.
Because even the ones that existed, we talked about, there was The Ladies' Man, or there was Superstar, and Superstar is the only one that I think kind of took off. Like, I know there's still people in our generation who have strong feelings towards Superstar. I'm not necessarily one of them, but I know that is one of them.
I've never seen Superstar, so.
Yeah, I guess the only other one would be MacGruber at this point.
Oh, MacGruber, yeah.
Because I mean, there hasn't really been a great SNL adaptation in a long time.
Because I don't think they do them, right? You know.
I mean, the joke is that SNL right now is not really even as good as it used to be, and I wonder if that's also a part of it. Like, are people not buying into the SNL hype anymore? Whereas I would argue, when they just did SNL at home a couple of weeks ago during COVID, like, the stuff they were doing, it wasn't amazing at times, but the fact that those people could get together and do an hour-long sketch show over Zoom and like actually put shorts together was remarkable.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess there's something to be said about all of that, because even looking back, I would say that Wayne's World, Blues Brothers, and maybe Coneheads are the most prominent SNL movies.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if Coneheads is as prominent, just because that's from a definitely earlier run of like those major players from SNL, like, you know, your Will Ferrells or Chris Farley's and whatnot, Adam Sandler's, like, they kind of over, to me, those movies definitely over. Well, even Adam Sandler's aren't SNL because they're his own thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, at this point they are. Even I think all of them were. I don't think Lorne really produced.
Yeah, right. Yeah, now that I think about it, I don't think so. You're right. So, but still, I mean, SNL talent wise, there's very few that made that jump. But I think what you do see now, really though, is you'll see like your Kristen Wiggs and Kate McKinnon's, and who have, you know, even still Will Ferrell to this day, you know, going to other properties or making other movies that are aside from SNL, because SNL just isn't going to do that stuff anymore. So, because if they did, it's like, I would think at this point now, if they did, they would be like direct to streaming.
You know, especially now that Universal has their own streaming service coming out with the Peacock. Right. It's actually not, because I think, isn't MacGruber doing a TV show on there? I think it was one of the announcements.
Something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're definitely gearing up to do things like that, which I guess actually makes sense in the long run. But at the same time, it's just a little weird thing.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what they do once they have that app of their own, what they're going to put on there and who they utilize and whatnot.
Well, we're going to find out a little bit more about that in July, I think, is when the official launch date is what they said the other day. There's a beta version of it floating around right now, but with the official Psych 2 and things like that, Saved by the Bell's new season, all that's coming. But thinking now back at Tommy Boy 25 years later, do you think you could take this movie and make it now?
Yes, definitely. Oh, definitely. Because when you look at, given today's political climate, and you look at the way the American public, this country views the top 1%, you know, CEOs, and then you look at middle America, the working man, that whole thing can definitely play into today's world and actually resonate, I think maybe even more so than it did back then, due to just the income inequality in this country. And you look at, basically, Tommy is trying to save the middle class
Right.
by having to go to the top 1%, and plead his case. And in the end, he wins. And so, like, that's, the small guy overcoming, the top guy. So I definitely think there is a version of this, of Tommy Boy, that you could make today that would definitely resonate, but also be very, very funny. So I think you could.
That's really interesting that you bring it up that way. I hadn't really thought about it in that light. It feels like one of those movies that I think could you potentially, but the way you just pitched it actually makes me think it's ripe for a reinvention of some sort. Because this is one of those movies I don't think you necessarily touch, but taking the basis of it, you could totally twist it and do it in a new way.
Yeah, I would never want to see Tommy Boy the remake. No, never.
Absolutely.
I don't ever want to see any Chris Farley movie remade. Because, or any Robin Williams movies for that matter. It's just like there are certain guys that you just, and some people feel the same way about Han Solo and things like that. You're never going to recreate those types of characters from those original actors because they fully embody them and they made them what they were. I mean, Chris Farley is really the only reason the movies like Tommy Boy and Black Sheep even work. You put somebody else in that role, I don't think it works at all because the movie is built on Chris Farley's shoulders. It's centered around him. He is the anchor. He's the guy you literally went to the theater to see. And
Sure.
you wanted, because you knew from SNL and everything that he does, and his antics and his just comedic genius, and you go and you sit in the theater for an hour and a half to see that in a feature presentation manner. So you could certainly, I think, take the story of it and morph it to fit today's world, but don't ever remake Tommy Boy. Don't ever remake Black Sheep. Don't ever remake,
Beverly Hills
the Blues Brothers. Like, I don't even want you to remake Blues Brothers. I mean, I know they made sequels and stuff. Like,
Well, yeah, but that's kind of what they did with
But-
Blues Brothers 2000s, and people
Yeah.
were pissed.
yeah, you're not going to recreate that stuff, man. You're just not. And it was popular because of Jim Belushi or John Belushi, and it's popular because of Chris Farley. It wasn't popular because it was the Blues Brothers movie. It wasn't popular because it's a Tommy Boy movie. It's popular because of those guys. That's why it's popular.
And it stayed in pop culture because of those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that Farley plays the part of Tommy is the reason we still quote things the way we do. I mean, you try to quote things in his voice because the things he says are so absurd,
Yeah.
but it's the way he delivers the line that takes it over the top.
I think I mean there's like the way he would just his physicality. I mean, I don't know. There's so much to look at his performances, and you start here with Tommy Boy. It's just no one's ever gonna recreate it, and so why bother?
Right,
Trying,
100%. And I mean, looking at some of our quotes that still from some of the people we had who sent us some of the stuff, Tim Franco's kind of goes to your point, and it literally just says Herbie Hancock.
Oh yes! Oh my gosh!
That's all I need to say.
It's just like, and you see him in the beginning of the movie, just like looking at it, and he goes, I got it, and you're like, okay, he was late. Maybe he's the guy who's just late and forgetful, and he goes in there and he's like, okay, but he's gonna go ahead and ace this test now. No, Herbie Hancock gets a D+, and he's ecstatic about it.
He's my kind of hero.
Yeah, right. He's like, yeah.
It's true. To Rachel Silvestrini's point, she says it's so epically genius and timeless. And I think, again, to your point of what we're talking about, of that timeless feel of the little guy versus the big guy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's exactly what I took out of it. I was like, wow, this actually really fits today. But at the same time, and because I know people will complain about, well, does it beat you over the head? No, it doesn't, because it's just a story about a guy, because you believe it because of Tommy's dad was the guy that was keeping that company going, and now he's not. Tommy Boy's got to figure out a way to save it, but he's got to talk to the big guy and convince him that, don't lose all these jobs, and he's going to do it in his own humorous, crazy, moronic way, and you root for that.
Hey, prehistoric forest.
Like, again, random. What is that even doing there? It's like, what? Also, like, why put the deer in your car, dude? Like,
Hey, you see that thing back there? It's not an air freshener. It's a dead, rotting deer carcass. Is one of my all-time favorite line readings.
I always love the air freshener, like deodorant. It's funny.
Oh yeah, and then you're gonna smell like a cab driver. Not that there's anything wrong.
Yeah.
We also had, of all people, your favorite person, Pat Hogue, sent me a whole block of message that says, I watched this movie for the first time before taking my driver's test, which I then failed. So I think that was influencing my driving, period.
Right. Well, I mean, if you just got out and said, bees are everywhere, then you probably would have passed.
I mean, it also explains, if you've ever been in the car with Pat Hogue, why he is the way he is.
I've never been in a car with him, or at least when he's driving, at least, I think.
Don't do it.
Okay.
Dan Brunner, actually, our friend of the podcast, he used to do all the belts. It was a Schmodown podcast you guys can find if you ever get a chance. But he actually sent one that's really interesting, and you and I haven't really hit on this, and I wanted to bring it up, is he said, when I was 10, I had a copy of the soundtrack on cassette and basically wore it out. Not only is the music incredible from top to bottom, but it's interspread with wonderful clips from the film. All this time later, that album is still one of the most absolute nostalgic for me, and Ears 2 still slaps.
Interesting. I never really pegged the movie for like a great soundtrack, to tell you the truth. But I think what he's describing, what he has, would be very interesting to listen to.
Well, I think about it in the way that he talks about it, and then if I start to think about some of the sequences in the movie, the music plays such an important part in certain sequences that I can totally see where he's coming from. I think the music is so wonderfully interspread throughout the film in very specific ways, to the point of the Carpenters sequence where they're singing the Carpenters together, crying in the car.
Oh, yeah.
Great sequences of the film.
That's a very good point. It's interesting. I'll have to kind of look at the movie again with that kind of lens.
Yeah, absolutely. We also had Kevin Smets, who said, I used to have a favorite shirt for the gym, and it was a Callahan Auto Parts shirt.
Oh, dude, that's awesome.
Also, they misquote Empire. It's not Luke, I am your father. It's no, I am your father. But this rad movie makes people misquote it to this day.
True. That's one of the first things I was thinking about when he says that line. I'm like, this is the reason why people misquote it. Part of the Mandela effect. We thought, isn't it Luke? No, Luke, I am your father. But it's literally, they're actually really directly quoting Tommy Boy when you think about it. And it's just like, that's the kind of impact and reach that Tommy Boy had that Chris Farley had. If it's coming out of Chris Farley's mouth, it's got to be funny. It's got to be worth saying,
Well, and what's funny is, to the point of everything we talked about earlier, he's such a doofus too. And so the fact that he's misquoting one of maybe the most iconic movie scenes in history, and it is the thing that's latched on.
I don't know about you, but when growing up after this movie, whenever there was a slow-moving, oscillating fan, did you not go up to the fan and talk and just say, like, I learned that from Tommy Boy, like, and I would do the Luke, I am your father, just blah, 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 like, that came from that,
Yeah. I mean, I was horribly influenced by this movie at a young age in the right way, so I did it all the time. I understood. How could you not?
Like, on a hot summer day, I'm trying to find a fan, and just go, Luke, I am your father.
Right.
It's so good.
Well, and to our point, Ben Goddard sent us one that said, one of the most quotable comedies still to this day, Chris Farley's physical comedy mixed with David Spade's dry sarcasm made a perfect duo.
Absolutely. And they did it again in Black Sheep. Right.
Which was so funny because Peter Segal was actually offered the chance to come back and direct it.
Oh, wow.
And he turned it down, and it actually kind of destroyed his friendship with Chris.
Wow.
Because it wasn't anything personal, but he was already seeing the train track going the same way, and he didn't really want to get on that right away. Understandable, because he had just come off what he thought was going to be a huge financial failure for him, or even just what it would look like for him. So for him, he didn't see the need to come back.
And look, real quick, kind of another tangent here, even though this isn't a Black Sheep episode of Something Rotten, but you look at the theme, or one of the themes in Black Sheep is that it's this guy trying to run for governor, his brother, and he's trying to get this message across, and it's kind of a little bit more political in a sense, but again, I haven't seen this movie in quite some time as well. I would like to go back and just see how well it could translate politically speaking with today's current climate. It would be interesting.
I think that maybe we'll make Black Sheep one of our, not maybe like the next episode, because we already have something you and I have talked about, but I think that that's one we might have to look at, because I think there's something to be said about it. Maybe early next year, because I think it came out in '96. So if case, it might be perfect for a 25th anniversary, episode next season. Or next year, not season. Diego Crespo, our friend from the Waffle Press podcast, says, I just love Chris Farley. And then, of course, I believe Maxwell Haddad with the very last quote for this show, coming from, I feel like Tommy Boy has always been there. The nostalgia runs deep, but unlike some other comedies I loved when I was younger, it holds up because it has a lot of heart, and Chris Farley is absolutely magical.
Yeah, man, there's just... And you understand why, in the beginning of the movie, everyone in that factory is saying hi to Tommy, you know? Right. And you get it fully by the end of the movie, but certainly throughout the course of the movie, you're like, yeah, man, you do want to root for this guy, because he has a good heart, and he has the best of intentions, and he just happens to be a bit of a goofball. And maybe in your life, you're a bit of a goofball and haven't done everything 100%, but you have the best of intentions, you have a good heart. So his character is definitely relatable on different levels for a lot of people out there.
No, absolutely, and I think that's why we continue to come back to it 25 years later, and it speaks to the timeless quality of the film and what it's doing, and I think that that's a huge thing.
So why was this movie even rated rotten? I don't understand. Who are these people?
Right, and
write a strongly worded email.
Well, I mean, I believe we know people over at Rotten Tomatoes that we could push this through to, actually.
Well,
you know what? I think Rotten Tomatoes should listen to every one of these episodes, and then we should readjust the Rotten rating accordingly.
Right. We should. Yeah, just two guys who have immense sway on the tomato meter.
I mean, look, there's worse things. I'm just saying.
Sure, that's true.
We're very important people.
Yes.
My library smells of rich mahogany. So thinking back on it now, looking at this, do you see why it would be rotten? Do you think that it deserves to be rotten? It currently also has the average score of 5.1 out of 10. So, I mean, this is legitimately right down the middle on the critics spectrum.
Yeah, I do see why someone would rate it rotten. A lot for the reason of, wow, that's a weird way to phrase something. That's like a word salad. Mainly because of there are these scenes that seem to be just strung together with these comedic moments in there that really have no particular rhyme or reason to the overall narrative, except for the fact that he's trying to sell brake pads, and are just wacky moments that are just kind of are random. And so for that reason, I could see why someone would rate it rotten, but it's for those wacky moments and antics that kind of come out of nowhere that are fun for me to watch, because I'm watching Chris Farley, 99% of those. I'm watching Chris Farley just act a fool and make me laugh, and that's the enjoyment I get out of this movie.
No, totally. And I think for me, looking at it as a road trip film, I know it's easy to look at comedies and it's easy to be like, well, it's dumb. It's not really saying a lot. It doesn't really do it for me. But for me, I actually think that this movie goes against a lot of the typical comedy grain. I think it actually has an abundance of heart. I think it has an abundance of something to say about friendship and the writing people off just because you don't think they're as smart as you. I think there's a lot in here that is overlooked because it's looked at as this stupid Lorne Michaels comedy, and it's more than that. I think this is arguably one of the best things he's produced for that reason. So it is a little mind-boggling to me that it even has the average rating of 5.1. To me, that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if we had Rotten Tomatoes back in 1995, there's no way this thing is rated rotten. There's just I refuse to believe that.
No, I can't even imagine that it would be, but here we are. It's just the weirdest thing, and that's kind of the point of going back and looking at these, because this system now being influential as influential as it is, to take this and put this movie into that box, and now seeing how it's come out, it's just so crazy to me.
It is, because not to rag on Adam Sandler, but Adam Sandler, he makes rotten, quote unquote, rotten movies. If we're talking about Rotten Tomatoes, right? And Chris Farley, he did not do that. He just did not. Objectively speaking, I mean, Adam Sandler, his first handful of movies were legitimately like great comedies. Chris Farley, although I would have to go back and watch Beverly Hills Ninja, which I don't think holds up to. Last I
It's not
remember,
great.
doesn't hold up to Black Sheep and Tommy Boy and whatnot. So, sure. I mean, no one's gonna bat 1,000, but like 2 out of 3 is pretty good.
I mean, yeah, I mean, at least to me, I guess it would be 2 out of 4 because I think Almost Heroes, the last one he did with Matthew Perry, is also not.
Oh.
Um,
Oh right! Wow,
remember that movie?
Yeah,
like in the height of the
barely. Yes, yeah. Wow.
That's a movie that exists, and it's one that it was. I think it was his last live action film. But I mean, and don't forget that without this movie, Shrek may not even have become what it did in a way, because without this movie,
Yeah.
Shrek may not have happened. Period, because Chris Farley was originally Shrek.
So weird if that was going to be the case now, because Mike Myers obviously is such. He's taken over. Like he really embodied what Shrek ultimately became.
Right.
So it is kind of as great as Chris Farley is. It's honestly more of a testament to Mike Myers. It's honestly very hard for me to see Chris Farley as Shrek, like voicing Shrek. It's because it'd be a completely different character, but like, wow, what if that was?
Have you seen any of the storyboard footage that they did with his voice?
I have, yeah. It's
so
very weird.
Yeah,
it's so weird, man.
That's one of those things. If you guys get a chance, look up Chris Farley Shrek. There's actually storyboarded scenes that have been released with his voiceover work for it.
I used to think seeing some of that footage of Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly was weird. Chris Farley as Shrek is beyond that to me, honestly. Mm-hmm. It is so weird to see
it's
that.
Totally straight. And the design's totally different, too. Like, I mean, there's hints of what Shrek would become, but it's a different design. It's a totally different feel. I'm still always going to be curious, though. It's always going to sit in the back of my mind as of what if, but it's always just kind of funny. I think it all starts here. It all starts with Lorne Michaels actually putting Chris Farley on SNL, and now look where we are. 25 years later, we're still talking about Tommy Boy.
Yeah, so it's great. It is great.
It is. It's 100% great. And so with that, I think, do you have anything else you'd like to add to the conversation before we wrap this guy up?
No, I think I'm pretty good. I'm looking forward to the next episode we do for this.
Well, I'll go ahead and just put that up real quick. It's something that you and I have talked about. We are going to be doing one of our favorite adventure films of all time, The Mummy, and The Mummy Returns, with none other than Stacey Howard. Stacey Howard reached out. She is a big fan of these films and wanted to be able to come on and talk the majestic adventuring that is The Mummy and The Mummy Returns. Frank, how are you feeling?
Again, I have not. What's great about this is the majority of these movies I have not revisited in quite some time. But I do remember just watching these movies ad nauseum, both of them. Well, more so the first Mummy than Mummy Returns, but I love them almost equally the same. Although I guess I could say I like Mummy a little bit more. But still, man, they are such a good time. It's going to be a pleasure to rewatch these movies and talk about them and then become confounded as to how they're rotten. I like
every time. I mean, look, again, you guys have no idea just how long this list of stuff is. What's funny, like to the Young Guns 2 watch-alongs point, that originally started as a Something Rotten episode, and we had Ellis as the listed person. I was looking back at our list, and Young Guns 1 and 2 was one that we had wanted to get with Ellis, and now we're doing the watch-along instead.
I mean, hey. I'll take it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it all works out at the end of the day, but I'm happy we're doing it. Real quick, just before you and I sign off, once again, if you guys did not already, check out Sunday night's PJ Campbell show where we talked Broadway musicals. Yesterday's special 420 episode, we had Mark Andreyko and RB3 here talking stoner comedies. Tonight, watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show watch along. It begins at 7 p.m. And then tomorrow night, watch us actually deconstruct that soundtrack. It's going to be Whitney Seibold, William Bibiani, and host Chris Clark. And of course, Friday night, Frank Janisch, Pat Hogue, myself, Evan Degraff, and baby carrots himself, Mark Ellis, are going to be going on a blaze of glory for Young Guns 2. And I could not be more thrilled.
I thought about rewatching Young Guns 2 before this because I haven't seen it in a while. I've seen Young Guns more recently than I've seen Young Guns 2, but I thought about, well, let me just revisit this with some more of a fresh look because, dude, I cannot. I've actually seen it more on regular network television, like Saturday Movie of the Week, than I have actually like on DVD. So, but I remember it very clearly.
Oh, it's the best. I love this movie. I'm excited to talk about it. And of course, Family Game Night Saturday, come hang out with Tom Dagnino and Tim Franco during Cards Against Humanity, which is just insane. And then for all of May, Rian Johnson month. Lots going on for the live action watch alongs. We're going to talk about literally every one of Rian Johnson's films. And I know that, Frank, you and I are very excited to revisit The Last Jedi.
Yeah, even Knives Out. Maybe I'll try and make that one, but The Last Jedi for sure. Last Jedi for sure.
Nothing controversial is going to be said in that episode. I don't expect that there's going to be fighting in the chat at all. I think it's going to go great.
Swimmingly.
With that, Frank, where can the kids find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at FrankieJ29. You also find me on the Schmodown Rundown every Saturday and Sunday. Saturday on the podcast feed, Sunday on the SEN YouTube channel. That airs 12 p.m. Pacific on Sunday on SEN.
And if you guys have not subscribed to SEN, I actually have that channel linked on the video itself or on the channel itself so you can find Frank's stuff a little bit easier. I wanted to make sure that they could get to the rundown.
Excellent. Well, much appreciated.
I got you. That's what I'm here for. Of course, you guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at PJ_Campbell. If you have not already, like the video below and leave your comments. I want to hear what you guys love about Tommy Boy because you didn't get to be on this one live with us. And I don't think we're probably ever going to do this one live unless it's something like it really calls for it, because this is more of a Frank and I sit down and really dissect these movies. And it's a lot easier to kind of go through it in this way, I think, instead of always like looking over at the comments and seeing what's going on. Yeah. But so if you guys want, leave a comment below, hit the like button, and share the video. Let people know about Something Rotten. This is our first episode, and without your guys' help of spreading the word, we won't get anyone to watch it. So I want your guys' help. Let's get the love for Tommy Boy out there and this love for this show.
Absolutely, man. I could not be more thrilled.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for spending your Wednesday evening with us talking my favorite comedy and a movie that you had a great time revisiting. And we'll see you guys here next week talking The Mummy and The Mummy Returns. It's going to be quite the night, and we look forward to it. We will talk to you guys soon.